Most gardeners till every spring and fall, spending hours breaking up the same ground they broke up last season, wondering why soil never improves. Amish farms across Pennsylvania haven't run a tiller in 200 years. Their soil gets richer every single season without one. What tilling is actually doing to your soil. Every pass of a tiller blade does three things most gardeners never realize. It destroys the underground fungal networks that connect plant roots and move nutrients between them, networks that take months to rebuild after a single disruption. It slices earthworms in half, killing the exact organisms responsible for the biological fertility most gardeners are trying to buy in a bag. And it flips dormant weed seeds from deep in the soil up to the surface where light can trigger them, creating the exact weed pressure most gardeners blame on not tilling enough, when tilling itself is the reason those seeds are there in the first place. What if the soil was already trying to heal? Let me ask you something. What if your soil has been trying to repair itself every single winter, rebuilding fungal networks, drawing earthworms back in, layering organic matter from fallen leaves and crop residue, and every spring when you run the tiller through it, you reset that recovery process to zero before it ever gets the chance to finish? Soil scientists studying the natural recovery rate of disturbed agricultural soil have documented exactly this pattern, with measurable improvements in biological activity beginning within 6 to 8 weeks of tilling stopping and significant structural recovery visible within a single season of undisturbed surface mulching. Amish farms that have maintained continuous no-till beds for decades aren't working with fundamentally different soil than their neighbors started with. They're working with the same basic clay and loam that underlies most of the northeastern United States, soil that has simply been allowed to do what soil naturally does when it isn't repeatedly disrupted. The transition period from tilled to no-till is the hardest part for most gardeners because the first season looks messier. The mulch layer sits visibly on top, weeds sometimes push through the cardboard edges, and the results aren't dramatic until the second and third season when the biology has had time to establish. Getting through that first season without reaching for the tiller is the entire challenge, and Amish farming tradition handled it the same way it handled everything else, by trusting a system that had worked for generations before there was ever a machine offering to do it faster. The no-till foundation. Amish farms are built on Amish no-till gardening isn't simply skipping the tiller and hoping for the best. It's an active layering system that feeds the soil from the top down, mimicking what happens on a forest floor where nothing ever tills, and yet the richest, darkest soil on Earth builds steadily, year after year, without any human help at all. Organic matter in the form of compost, straw, aged manure, and crop residue gets laid on the surface of the bed rather than worked in. Soil organisms, from earthworms to fungi to bacteria, do the actual incorporation work underground, pulling that surface material downward over weeks and months, converting it into plant-available nutrients without a single blade disturbing the biological structure doing the work. The gardener's role shifts from breaking the soil apart every season to simply feeding the surface and staying out of the way, a change in approach that costs almost nothing and returns more than any mechanical system ever managed. The earthworm economy running underground. Earthworm populations are the clearest measure of how well a no-till system is functioning, and Amish farmers across Ohio and Indiana have understood this for generations simply by watching how their soil behaved after years of undisturbed management. A single earthworm passes roughly its own body weight in soil through its digestive system every day, leaving behind castings that are 5 times richer in available nitrogen, 7 times richer in phosphorus, and 11 times richer in potassium than the surrounding soil. A healthy no-till bed in its third or fourth year can support earthworm populations dense enough to turn over the equivalent of several inches of soil per season without any mechanical intervention at all, doing a better job than the tiller and leaving the soil structure intact rather than broken apart. Tilled soil loses up to 70% of its earthworm population within a single growing season, according to a University of Wisconsin soil biology study from 2019, resetting this biological fertility engine to zero every single time the blade goes in, and sending the gardener straight to the fertilizer shelf to replace what the machine just destroyed. The fungal network tilling destroys. Now, here's what makes no-till even more effective than simply protecting earthworms: the mycorrhizal fungal network that develops in undisturbed soil and physically extends the reach of every plant root in the garden. Mycorrhizal fungi form thread-like connections called hyphae that grow through soil in all directions, connecting root systems of neighboring plants and transferring water, phosphorus, and trace minerals across distances a root alone could never reach. A tomato plant growing in a no-till bed with an established fungal network effectively has a root system 10 to 20 times larger than the same plant growing in freshly tilled soil where the network has been cut apart. Amish gardeners in Pennsylvania describe this benefit in practical terms, passed down through generations, noting that plants in long undisturbed beds seem to feed themselves through dry spells that wilted plants in newer beds, without understanding the fungal mechanism that explained exactly why. A Penn State soil ecology study from 2020 measured mycorrhizal colonization rates dropping by over 60% in tilled plots compared to no-till controls, with measurable effects on drought tolerance and phosphorus uptake across the entire growing season. The cover crop system that works all winter. The active half of Amish no-till gardening happens in fall after the main harvest is finished, when most modern gardeners either till everything under or leave beds bare through winter. Amish farmers across Wisconsin and Indiana sow cover crops immediately after clearing fall harvests. Fast-growing plants like winter rye, crimson clover, hairy vetch, and field peas that establish root systems before the ground freezes and hold the soil structure intact through the freeze-thaw cycles that break up bare ground all winter long. Winter rye in particular sends roots 18 to 24 inches deep by spring, physically breaking up any compacted subsoil layers that would otherwise require mechanical tillage to address, doing the deep work the tiller was hired for at a fraction of the cost. Crimson clover and hairy vetch fix atmospheric nitrogen directly into the soil through root bacteria, adding the equivalent of a full application of nitrogen fertilizer with no purchase required. By spring, these cover crops get cut at the soil surface and left as a mulch layer that the no-till bed feeds on through the early growing season without anything being turned under. A Michigan State University cover cropping trial from 2018 measured nitrogen contributions from a winter vetch crop at the equivalent of $40 to $60 worth of commercial fertilizer per 1,000 square feet, delivered for the cost of a handful of seed that costs less than $3 at any farm supply store. Let me ask you something most people never consider. Let me ask you something most people never consider. What is the actual cost of tilling when you add everything up across a full season? A basic rear tine tiller runs $500 to $1,200 to purchase. Renting one costs $80 to $150 per day. Fuel, maintenance, and storage add another $50 to $100 annually for owners. And then there's the invisible cost on the other side of the ledger. The fertilizer purchased to replace the nitrogen tilling releases and then burns off. The pest spray applied because tilling disrupted the beneficial insect habitat in the soil surface. The extra watering needed because tilled soil loses moisture to evaporation faster than mulched no-till beds, and the weed management time spent pulling the exact seeds the tiller brought to the surface. Amish farms avoided every one of these costs simultaneously, not because they were trying to save money on paper, but because the no-till system they inherited never generated those costs in the first place. A gardener converting a 500 square foot vegetable bed from annual tilling to no-till eliminates the tiller cost entirely and typically reduces fertilizer, water, and weed management costs by half within 2 seasons, according to homesteading cost analyses published by the University of Minnesota Extension in 2019. The savings compound every year the system runs undisturbed, Z, for the cost of a handful of seed that costs less than $3 at any farm supply store. The sheet mulching method, step by step, converting an existing tilled bed to no-till starts with a one-time setup called sheet mulching, a layered smothering technique that Amish gardeners across Pennsylvania have used for generations to build new beds on top of existing ground without ever breaking the soil. The bottom layer is plain corrugated cardboard laid directly on the soil surface, overlapping edges by 6 inches to block light completely, and thoroughly wet down so it begins breaking down immediately. The cardboard smothers existing weeds and grass without chemicals, and earthworms begin moving into the layer within days, drawn by the moisture and decomposing fiber. On top of the cardboard goes 2 to 3 inches of finished compost or aged manure, which feeds the bed through its first season, while the cardboard layer below breaks down over 4 to 6 months. The top layer is 4 to 6 inches of straw mulch, which holds moisture, regulates soil temperature, and provides the slow-release organic matter the no-till system feeds on continuously. Seeds go directly into the compost layer through the straw, and transplants get pushed through to the cardboard layer below. The entire setup costs under $10 for a standard raised bed using sourced cardboard from any grocery or appliance store, straw from a local farm, and homemade compost. After the first season, the only maintenance is adding a fresh inch of compost each fall and a fresh layer of straw, taking 30 minutes and costing under $5 in materials for a bed that requires no mechanical preparation ever again. What if the problem is the solution? Let me ask you something. What if every time you fired up the tiller, you were dismantling the very system that makes soil fertile in the first place, and then spending the rest of the season trying to rebuild it with fertilizer and amendments that wouldn't have been needed if the system was left alone? Amish farmers in Lancaster County never framed it in those terms because they never had a tiller to begin with, but the principle their great-grandparents followed in the 1700s is exactly what modern soil scientists spent decades of research eventually confirming. Disturbed soil loses fertility, and undisturbed soil builds it on its own, without any intervention from the person who owns it. The machine sold as the solution was always the problem. The third season payoff. By the third consecutive year of no-till management, something shifts in the bed that no single amendment or fertilizer product can replicate. The soil stops needing to be managed and starts managing itself. Earthworm populations have fully recovered and stabilized, turning over several inches of soil per season without any help. The mycorrhizal network has spread through the entire root zone, reducing water needs during dry spells and moving phosphorus to plant roots faster than any soluble fertilizer can deliver it. Weed pressure has dropped dramatically because the cardboard layers from the original setup and subsequent annual mulching have exhausted the surface seed bank that tilling was perpetually refreshing. The compost layer added each fall has built organic matter content in the top several inches of soil, from the 1 to 2% typical of tilled garden beds to 5 to 8%, the range where soil holds moisture like a sponge, resists compaction, and supports the kind of plant growth most gardeners think requires expensive intervention. Amish farm families who have worked the same kitchen garden plots for 4 and 5 generations describe this state without the scientific vocabulary, talking about soil that works with you instead of against you, ground that plants seem to root into easily even in dry summers, beds that barely need feeding because they feed themselves. A University of Ohio soil carbon study from 2019 measured organic matter in long-term no-till plots at more than triple the level found in annually tilled control plots on the same farm, with measurably higher yields in the no-till beds across every crop type tested. Final closing. 200 years of Amish farms and not one tiller in sight. The no-till method destroys nothing, costs almost nothing to set up, and builds the exact biological fertility that tilling systematically dismantles every single spring. Sheet mulch the bed once, cover crop it every fall, add an inch of compost every season, and then leave it alone while the earthworms, fungi, and bacteria do every job the tiller was doing badly and expensively. The fungal networks grow back, the earthworm population doubles, and then doubles again. The weed seeds at the surface run out. The soil carbon builds season after season until the bed is feeding itself. The soil builds while you sleep, just like the title says, and unlike the tiller, it never needs fuel, never needs maintenance, and never breaks down at the start of planting season. So here's the real question. Are you going to till your beds again this spring, or is this the season you stop? Drop a comment below and let us know. And while you're there, pick your team. Team no-till starting now if you're converting your beds this fall, or team still running the tiller if you're not ready to let it go yet. If this video showed you what tilling has been costing your garden all along, subscribe to the Amish Life for more of these forgotten methods. And share this with someone who fires up the tiller every single spring without ever asking whether they should. Cross every crop type tested.